we're not live yet.
I'm showing you a bill and whoever wants to see it in chat there.
Oh,
My new Sasquatch mask from Argentina showed up, and I have feet, as you'll see on that image and stuff like that. We're getting custom clothing, but if you get a chance to look at the image, that's Mystical Wares. I got my hand on a cedar carved Sasquatch. But anyway, I'll talk about that in a minute. I'll give you a 10-second countdown here.
okay.
I'll let you head.
Welcome back to the Working That Is Chrononaut Chronicles podcast. My name is Bill. I am the host of this endeavor, this working, and this is sponsored by mysticalwares.com, and that is Derek Condit's store. He is here with us this evening, along with two other Prime Chrononauts. We will hear from them in just a moment, but taking a quick look at the old Farmer's Almanac, I can see that on Tuesday, the Moon and Venus are conjunct. Wednesday, the Moon and Mars are conjunct. And then on Thursday, nothing planetarily, but there are some happenings in regards to feast days. Shavuot begins at sundown in the Orthodox Christian Church. So this is Ascension Thursday. And there's also the feast day of Saint Bede, which ties into a synchro we'll get into later. But that aside, the next segment that we do on this show after just taking a quick look at the almanac has to do with gratitudes. We all share something that makes us joyful, and there is a challenge behind each of these segments on the show. There's three main segments: the gratitude one, and then we have the new business in the middle of the show, and then at the end we try to do something inspirational. And each of these segments are issued with a challenge, something that I challenge myself to do, really. And for anybody else that wants to partake, it's awesome. I've gathered other like-minded people, such as as other Chrononaut Primes here, so to kind of walk us through the steps in this first this working, right. So the first half is the first half has to do with gratitude, like I said before, and the challenge is to perpetuate that state, right. We're not just getting on here to talk about it once and then be done with it, but we want to live within the bubble of gratitude, right. And then the second main section is continuing education, just learning something new. Like what did we learn since we last talked to each other, or maybe something occurred in your life that led to a new development, right? So new business is what I've been calling it. And then the third is meant to inspire action, right? To remind us of who we are and that we are capable of many miraculous things. So with all that being explained, gratitude. Yeah, I'll kick us off because I don't know if I've used this before, but my gratitude this week was going to be chiropractors. Chiro. That's an interesting word in itself. But yeah, I had an old injury come up on my back just from coughing incorrectly. And I was down and out for about 2 days before I could get back in to see the doctor, chiropractor. He fixed me right up. I get to go back tomorrow. But yeah, it was pretty not to complain or anything, but it was pretty painful. I think I was nauseous for a little bit. Couldn't really sleep for a night. And yeah, but all better now. And thank God for chiropractors. You got to find a good one though. That's I've had experiences with more than one, right? So you yeah, do your research first if you're gonna go and start that kind of treatment. But I've talked since the beginning of the show. I'd like to kick it off to somebody else to share a gratitude. Anybody want to jump in? Possibly Derek.
Sure. Yeah, I can jump in. And I hope there's not an echo on this podcast right now. I've been messing with the audio back here, but I want to say my gratitude. I'm kind of with you on that one, Bill, as far as chiropractors, because I have several chiropractor friends around here that are just phenomenal individuals to know and to be around and to get to work with at times because of how they are aware of energy. And they do muscle testing and things like that. So no, I'm with you on the chiropractors, and then of course personal help as well. But I'm gonna give my gratitude's actually for the first time, oddly enough, to an individual, and it's an author. So it's Richard Bach. And I actually found out that he lives out here. He's in his late 80s now. Out here on Orcas Island, so in my neck of the woods. And he wrote a bunch of books way back when in the 70s and whatnot. And some of them would be Illusions or Jonathan Livingston Seagull. And he's so he's an author. For those that don't know, I won't get too much into it. You can, search engine him later and look into it. And there's a lot of books. It's Richard Bach, Bach. And when you think of, and there's even a movie on, I think it's on YouTube somewhere, on Jonathan Livingston Seagull that talks about a bunch of seagulls, but that's not what it is. There's a lot to the story. So he speaks around things on multiple levels or layers, you can say. So, and then there's a lot of audio readings of some of his work. And again, if to the quick eye reading the names of the books, there a lot of them don't make sense, or some do. So it just depends. But I'd say be open to it. Even the Ferret Chronicles, which is one of them, and yep, it's about a family of ferrets. But when you start reading these things, and or you see the movie version of the Jonathan Livingston Seagull, there's a whole lot of aha moments in there that not only myself, but who knows, countless others have over the decades. So kind of a shout out, a gratitude for an individual like that to share their understandings with all of us. And it's one of the last add-on is it's one of those things where you can read and pick any one of the books, and there's a lot of them. You can read them a second, third, fourth time, and you're going to pick up more stuff every single time, more of those breadcrumbs or synchronicities. And even now I do that. So that was my gratitude.
That's awesome. I have read a few of his books. Actually, I was just sharing with my mother yesterday the Ferret Chronicles.
Uh, are you kidding? Yeah, see, there again, Bill and I didn't set this up. So, I mean, how many people talk about the Ferret Chronicles or even say that on any given day, let alone you the day before, and we're on a podcast? So I would take that, and again, synchronicity, everybody listening out there, that it's not random that the Bill was talking to that about his mom, and I'm sure others have input on the show too. But yeah, so that's awesome.
Yeah, I guess I need to buy her a copy or let her borrow mine. I just was sending her a picture of the book, so she hasn't actually read it yet. But yeah, definitely worth checking out. Also related to Johann Sebastian Bach, the composer, correct?
Oh, that is correct. I forgot about that. That's yeah, like I said, Richard's supposed to live out here in a nearby island. We got a bunch of islands up here. And his propane guy, his propane guy came into Mystical Wares and said, "You remind me of him." Like, I know who you're talking about. He goes, "Well, I'll chat with him. His daughter's taking care of him up here." I'm not getting too much in the story. And then so I don't know. He let Richard know about Mystical Wares. That doesn't mean he's going to come running knocking on our door, but that's pretty cool. How that's all ties together, and his propane guy wanders in here.
That is cool. That is so cool. Ben, did you have a gratitude?
Well, it's funny that little synchro chain. I took note of the Ferret Chronicles. Bach's been a favorite author, and now all of a sudden grateful for Derek reminding me of Jonathan Livingston Seagull. That was a influential book for um I don't know, a couple years. I carried that one around and let people borrow it, and then got into some pretty deep discussion. It was a great one to have around. So I'm grateful for that reminder. Initially, I was going to be grateful for leisure time and more specifically my hammock, because I suppose uncoincidentally, I also had an old injury of my lower back show up this week. kind of forcing that leisure time to recover. And I find a hammock and that sort of weightlessness to be a big help uh, in how I heal that injury. It's been a while since it popped up, and yeah, sort of forced some change. So I ended my season of dock building and carrying heavy stuff around for a living, and while healing up this injury, am sort of plotting the new course, which is still sort of an unknown. It's sort of exciting in that I don't know where I'm going next, but I'm going in a few days. So we'll see what happens.
That is exciting. We will be along for the ride if you want to check in with us on Mondays. Although I don't know if we will be here next Monday though, because it is Memorial Day. So I was kind of thinking that we would just take a break because I know I will be traveling out of town for a wedding. So I don't even know if I'll be here. So
Oh, sure. Yeah, just take a pause for next week and meet back up.
awesome. And that leaves Chrononaut Adam, who is here with us all as well. Adam, what's up, buddy?
Not much. Yeah, my gratitude is the prevalence of myth, ancient stories, and how they continue to just they're in everything. Everything is steeped in it. Very successful things, whether it's Star Wars or Harry Potter, and particularly right now, my mind is in the world of Harry Potter. I'm just picked up Hogwarts Legacy, and it's just so beautifully and intricately done in the world. And I just sitting back and thinking that there's so many ancient myths and stories that she used and pulled from to create that world, and those are all the real things that I don't know, just breathed life into something else. I find that just endlessly fascinating that there are literally some tales that are older than time.
That is pretty cool. I'm a big fan of myth myself, and this ties in perfectly to what I'm going to bring up in the second segment. But just on the topic of myths and legends, I was listening to, I forget what podcast it was, but they were talking about this subject, and they brought up the analogy of a telephone, like the game telephone, and how the messages get
It's one of
changed.
my favorite games. I don't think people play it anymore now that you actually have one in your
Yeah.
pocket.
No, it's yeah. But the point being that the stories get twisted, right? So all these, in my opinion, right, and we'll talk about opinions in the third section, but these could be just real happenings that have been exaggerated, right, throughout the ages. So we just got to pick
Oh
through.
yeah, but I even mean that in just not even deeper on like a Jungian, there are just ways that the world is. Like a story like Homer, these tales are reiterated and reused throughout everything. And there's a reason why, when George Lucas, works with Carl Jung and starts pulling these like just, there's a reason why it resonates with people. So I don't know, it's the biblical tale. It doesn't matter whether or not it is intrinsically true to history per se, but it is a statement that is universally true for being a human being. Um, so yeah, like just the story of Homer, like the types of women that you're going to meet, the type of people that you're going to meet, the situations that there are in the world. So yeah, no, I just that, and then taking so many different things in history and pulling it together into something just new, like a brand new thing that overtook culture. And people think oh, it's Harry Potter, it's just Kid Under the Stairs, which is true. And there's a lot more of just corporate BS on top of it. But I mean, uh, at its heart, it has just deep ancient myth. And yeah, I don't know. It's beautiful to think about the beauty that can be reimagined from it.
It is beauty inspires, period, right? Beauty just inspires, which is a good thing because we don't get enough of that in this world. I think inspiration.
Exactly. The idea that if you were to see a flower as a human being in 10,000 years ago or today. It doesn't matter if it's a genus or species that doesn't exist or in an environment that's not cohesive today. It would still have its own intrinsic beauty. That flower would have its own truth that throughout time would still have the same effect. And so yeah, that's how I kind of see stories, that sometimes they can just keep pushing through time. They'll be here well beyond any living life and pulled into some Akashic record.
Ben, were you gonna say something about myth? No. But what also piques my interest when it comes to the topic of myth is stories like Homer, right? He wrote about Atlantis. So we have these connections to like real, like we know Homer existed, right? Like we know this person was real, but there's all this conjecture about Atlantis. So when we have these quote unquote real people talking about quote unquote mythical places or creatures or whatever, like why do we discount that as it's not accepted, it's not accepted by the mainstream, or Atlantis isn't taught in history schools or history class, right? But maybe it should be.
It's interesting how I guess how you're looking at myth there, because I'll read the Bible and call that mythology. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people to be upset with me for saying that, but I mean, it's really, the oral history that sooner or later got written down, that is your people's myth, right? So, or legend or whatever, there's so many words you could put to it, but it all really boils down, in my view, to that hero's journey, which it seems like George Lucas and um Rowling or Tolkien,
Yeah,
you know,
everybody, just
yeah.
look at all the great literature works of history. Look at just how movies, how film, how people respond to things. There's something really deep, and who knows until we discover other beings and communicate directly with them to compare notes on how their stories and myth have prevailed throughout their
Hmm.
society. But there's just a deep core that runs through human beings and what we react to. And the hero's journey really is the classic story, because it applies to a human being 12,000 years ago the same that it does to today.
Yeah, I mean, and look at the Bible through that lens. There's so
Hmm.
many heroes' journeys throughout there, right? And it is that um taking it as myth and metaphor, for your journey, is do that with any story you want to, you are the one writing your own myth, right? So
Yeah,
where do
it's
you
like
get your inspiration?
it's not so much a history tale, it's an interpretation guide on the
Hmm.
world that you're in. Hey, here's
Yeah.
the world you're in. It's really confusing. Here's how some people have dealt with it. And there's just some ways in dealing that just work as human beings. You can look into things just like the prisoner's dilemma. Yeah, there's some things that, you can kind of prove in a
Hmm.
way that just always work out to the benefit of, the individuals. And, you don't have to think about it too hard, because eventually it's just that the prisoner's dilemma per se is going to be something that, if those situations always come up, people would be reacting in the same ways. I don't know. I'm endlessly fascinated by just, I don't know, the prevalent, like the hero's myth. Like why is that core storyline, like that, like the core of, like, all great stories that inspire us? Like that to
Mm.
me is like, it's something, just, I mean, that's part of who we are. And we get off on experiencing it. We're being shown our potential within that.
Yeah, it's
Well,
very
so
much.
our spirit recognizing, uh the wherewithal to keep going, and giving, yourself a little extra nudge.
Exactly. Everybody wants the underdog to win, the person that's been bullied to, come back and, do the right thing, the Robin Hood story, like that, like like I don't know, that's what gets me off. So maybe I'm I'm projecting onto others.
Well, it is very much a formula, right? Like it's an illustration of what Don Miguel's been talking about with the three masteries. Like this is an example of somebody who is aware of their position and who they are and what they need to do, and they know how they know how to accomplish it. I mean, the story of transformation, right? They're not the same when they end when they started, right? So there's mastery of transformation, the mastery of awareness, and then the mastery of intent is well the mastery of love and of God. So that would be an illustration that of those three, I would say, and it's a pretty good formula to try to memorialize in the stars, which it has been. I mean, the Bible, you can make comparisons all day long to the constellations. Dave Matheson, when Ben and I were at Contact at the Cabin a few years ago, Dave Matheson did an excellent job.
Oh yeah, his work on, yeah. And that to me is the really deep stories of the Bible, deep into the Masonic, the sacred geometry, the real core of reality, the core of um existence as a human, a very long existence, a cyclical existence of a cataclysm. And yeah, it's well, it's a tale that's never going to end. The Bible or a form of that story is going to be in existence for a long time. Because I mean, what we trace back, stories in the Bible to 120,000 years ago, Mesopotamia, or to like the original, like, what am I trying to think, tablets.
Emerald tablets?
Well, no, like the original flood stories. Like it is a pervasive tale that was put back into the Bible. So yeah, I don't know. It is really cool to think that there is a book or a story that can last like across time, across civilizations falling and rising, across mankind almost being wiped out. There are some things that are so important, especially in a day before today. I mean, now a book is just, sending an email, but there was a ton of work into recording, ancient language and then storing ancient language without, you know, um, air conditioners and, modern equipment for controlling humidity and things like that. So, um, those stories are important. They've been the most important things to human beings to preserve. We don't have much else, but man, some of those stories.
Yeah. Another person that does a good job of decoding stuff like that is Marty Leeds.
Yep.
Had him on 13 Questions before too. Maybe I'll reach out and see if he wants to hang out with us sometime. I'm sure he would.
Yeah, and Laird Scranton is really, really amazing. From joining religions together. I don't know if you're familiar with his work. He was a computer programmer that decided to kind of look at the Dogon race and write a book on their language and look at languages, because he was, from like a computer programming standpoint, really interested in the language and the syntax and the words and how they connect. And then, I mean, now he's written so many books now on connecting um, words, symbols, visuals, geometry, stories across cultures. So we're taking the Dogon and connecting them to the Chinese, connecting them to India within their sacred geometry, within the words that they use, to ancient Egypt. And you can see the progression in the change of these core words that sound very similar and are all describing the same things and the same concepts across cultures. And yeah, he's a wonderful researcher to look at, because he kind of takes all these things spread out throughout the world and over different eras, and is able to really tie them together. In fact, what's most interesting thing about him is the archaeological language, I should say, discovered, because there used to be a more prevalent, I don't know, remember the name of, a more prevalent interpretation of the hieroglyphs. And then there's a modern one that is taught everywhere, Egyptology by Egypt. And he categorically says, yeah, a lot of this is way wrong. These books are wrong. And I only know that because, hey, when we look at this word, you're saying it means this in Egypt, but I have a word over here from the Dogon, or from the Buddhist priests, that is almost exactly the same in syntax or sound and has the same meaning. And also there's a symbol associated with it that visually looks the same. I think this is the meaning of the word, not the one you're using. So I know David Matheson knows about him. I know they're influenced on each other's work. So yeah, look up Laird Scranton. Awesome guy.
Yeah, the word is very, very powerful. It can be used in two different capacities. We can use it to build up, or we can use it to destroy, right? It's a double-edged sword. That's a we'll get into that later on the third segment. But my back to my kind of my initial thought about finding the real, like the links to, like the flood story, for example. Like every culture has one, but when you look at the work of somebody like Randall Carlson, and we can see real world geological evidence of, where this happened, and what are the signs that it left behind, and in these places that it did occur. So like that kind of stuff is really super interesting to me. And in my research of the lives of Catholic saints, which is maybe coming out of left field, but there's something that has been in my life since I was born. This religion, I was born into it, and actually spent some time in seminary, and later decided that wasn't for me. And we won't get into all the details, but now I'm here. Now we're here, right? So, but and to tie it back into last episode, right, we were going to talk about relics. So I have a relic of Saint Anthony de Padua, but I wanted to share a story with everybody about Saint Anthony the Great, who is a desert father, so-called desert father, lived in around the first century AD, I believe. Hold on. Excuse me. But so the relic I have is not from the story I'm about to share, but the story comes from a book called The Life of Paul the Hermit by Saint Jerome. And just as a side note, who is Saint Jerome? Saint Jerome was the dude that translated the Bible into Latin, which became known as the Vulgate translation. So pretty credible source, right? But this particular story is about an encounter with a satyr and a centaur by Anthony the Great, the Desert Father, or so he's called. And it's not too long, so I just thought I would read it. It's pretty accessible to find on the internet. You just type in Saint Anthony and satyr, and it'll pop up. So the little excerpt says that the blessed Paul had already lived on the earth the life of heaven for 113 years, and Anthony, at the age of 90, was dwelling in another place of solitude, as he himself was wont to declare, when the thought occurred to the latter that no monk more perfect than himself had settled in that desert. However, in the stillness of the night, it was revealed to him that there was further in the desert a much better man than he, and that he ought to go and visit him. So then, at the break of day, the venerable old man, supporting and guided his weak limbs with a staff, started to go. But what direction to choose he knew not. Scorching noontime came, and a broiling sun overhead, but he still did not suffer himself to be turned from the journey he had begun. So he said, I believe in my God. Some time or other he will show me the fellow servant whom he promised me. He said no more. This is where it gets interesting. All at once, he beholds a creature of mingled shape, half horse, half man, called by the poets Hippo Centaur. At the sight of this, he arms himself by making on his forehead the sign of salvation, and then exclaims, Hala. It's spelled Holloa. So I don't know, it's probably not Hala, but anyway, Hala, where in these parts is a servant of God living? The monster, after gnashing out some kind of outlandish utterance in words broken rather than spoken through his bristling lips, at length finds a friendly mode of communication, and extending his right hand, points out the way desired. Then, with swift flight, he crosses the spreading plain and vanishes from the sight of his wandering companion. But whether the devil took this shape to terrify him, or whether it be that the desert, which is known to abound in monstrous animals, engenders that kind of creature also, we cannot decide. Anthony was amazed, and thinking over what he had seen, went on his way. Before long, in a small rocky valley, shut in on all sides, he sees a mannequin with hooked snout, horned forehead, and extremities like goat's feet. When he saw this, Anthony, like a good soldier, seized the shield of faith and the helmet of hope. The creature, nonetheless, began to offer to him the fruit of the palm trees to support him on his journey, as it were pledges of peace. Anthony, perceiving this, stopped and asked who he was. The answer he received from him was this: I am a mortal being, and one of those inhabitants of the desert whom the Gentiles, deluded by their various forms of error worship, under the names, or under the I'm going to start that over. I am a mortal being, and one of those inhabitants of the desert, whom the Gentiles, deluded by various forms of error, worship under the names of fauns, satyrs, and incubi. I am sent to represent my tribe. We pray you in our behalf to entreat the favor of your Lord and ours, who we have learned came once to save the world, and whose sound has gone forth into all the earth. As he uttered such words as these, the aged traveler's cheeks streamed with tears, the marks of his deep feeling, which he shed in the fullness of joy. He rejoiced over the glory of Christ and the destruction of Satan, and marveling all the while that he could understand the satyr's language, and striking the ground with his staff, said, Woe to you, Alexandria, who instead of God worships monsters. Woe to you, harlot city, unto which have flowed together the demons of the whole world. What will you say now? Beasts speak of Christ, and you instead of God worship monsters. He had not finished speaking when, as if on wings, the creature fled away. And St. Jerome ends, Let no one scruple to believe this incident. Its truth is supported by what took place when Constantine was on the throne, a matter of which the whole world was witness. For a man of that kind was brought alive to Alexandria and shown as a wonderful sight to the people. Afterwards, his lifeless body, to prevent its decay through the summer heat, was preserved in salt and brought to Antioch, that the emperor might see it. So that last little part is that they had taken one of these creatures into the city of Alexandria, and apparently it died, and they kept the body. So accounts of saints, satyrs, and centaurs. So I guess, well, first of all, first impressions from anybody before I ask questions?
Actually, can you read that list again of the accompanying spirits?
Fauns, satyrs, and incubi, that list?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So it's a ragtag bunch, let's say.
Right. Right. So this creature is saying that he has a tribe of these other creatures, right? So this is another society then that we share the earth with, which is what I'm taking it for anyway.
Yeah, that's how I was seeing that.
But what I also thought was interesting was that so he comes across the centaur first, right? And they can't really understand each other, but they get the point across. And then he speaks to the satyr, But what the word used, and this just might be bad translation, but he said that he perceived when the thing was giving him fruit, right? So it's not like he didn't see it, he just perceived it, which I thought was interesting because that's a word that Derek often emphasizes, is perceiving with different or chakras essentially.
It's in your so I'm search engineing a satyr because I wasn't quite sure what we were talking about on some of these things, because a lot of entities or energies go by different names, of course, in different, societies, culture, different. So it looks like I don't even know what to say on this thing, but what I'm looking like maybe a goat-like blend of a man. Am I looking at the right image here?
Yeah.
Okay.
So a satyr would be like a goat, two legs, as opposed to a centaur, which is half man, half horse, 4 legs. So horse from the waist down would be centaur. Goats from the waist down would be a satyr or a fawn or an incubi. I think these are synonyms for the same creature.
Yeah, or like a puck in some places. What's the kid's story about the wardrobe, right? In Narnia, their guide is a half goat, half
Mr. Tumbas.
human.
Yeah.
That guy, yeah.
That's another synchronicity because I just watched that movie, I don't know, a week or two ago. Yeah, with some youngsters.
Yeah. And I mean, I've run into those in the woods before. It is much like you're sharing space with them once you're able to perceive these energies. It is kind of like living in a bigger city than you thought you were.
So would these be then interdimensional like Bigfoot, or are these? Well, he says that he's immortal. My head is ringing. Like, okay, it went away. But he says he's a mortal being. So I'm assuming that they're not. They you know.
They're more mortal. Okay, it's relative because, and now I don't use the word dimension. Think density, of course. I think we've talked about it. So it's more of a, it's all here in the same space, just like FM or AM radio. So it's not another place away. It's just a different frequency, vibration, or density. So they're here and they're mortal in their own level or density. But by the way, these densities, there's not a hard, and nobody's saying this anyway, there's not a hard cutoff anyway. It's called metaphysical perception. We pick up on the other levels. When I do the whole medium thing, that's all I'm doing is I'm holding a certain frequency around me, hitting a different density that other entities are, excuse me, are more physical on that density than ours. So it's kind of like, are they physical? Well, yeah, from their perspective. I mean, it's all relative. But yeah, those fawns and different creatures, and it's are on a different density, but Sasquatch, and it's not all encompassing anyway. They're not all other densities. They're here physically trucking around. I gave that story before about my dad walking up on one, and that one could not go inner density. I don't know if there's a word for that. Switch density. They can't all do that. It's like saying, oh, all humans are how do you say that? I'd say psychics. I mean, technically, yes, but they're usually not aware of it. So that goes the same way. That same understanding crosses over into that. So when I've communicated with Sasquatch or whatever, it's not like they're all that way. Not that I've seen, that's for sure. Or same thing with what people call ETs. They think, oh, they're all ETs, they're all advanced. I'm like, no, that's not always the case. And they're not all psychics, by the way. And a lot of people, not that anybody here is saying that, but I have had situations where people say, well, they got their little spaceship, they're all psychics, they've all reached level blah blah blah, and I'm like, no, that's not the case. And I have interactions, that's not the case. And I've remoted in on some of those. I don't know how much you want to get into that on a ship during a session, and they didn't all spin around and look at me. There was like one on the ship that even knew. My ears are just totally staticky right now, it's really weird. That even perceived my, air quotes here, energy entering the ship, what I call, what can be called remote perception, not just remote viewing. And I didn't know about that. I haven't read a book on that, so I don't know if people are talking about it, but it's Yeah, it can be done. So yeah, they're multi-density depending on, you know, who they're interacting with. So that's why some people will see a Sasquatch and some won't. It just varies is all.
So it sounds like maybe this particular satyr that Anthony had the run-in with was a quote unquote more advanced, one of the ones that could, you know,
Or the
recognize.
environment can affect that too. So I've been like, some people say, well, this place has a heavy energy, and I don't mean heavy and bad, but denser. Well, then yes, other radio stations will blend in those areas, if that makes sense. I don't have a vocabulary for a lot of this. But yeah, no, that happens.
And when did you say that Anthony was around? Because from my experience in communications, like the ancient times, the frequencies were way more free to commingle, let's say. So there was people were aware of a lot more back then because it just was.
Oh yeah, they didn't question. Yeah, they weren't deprogrammed and all the BS. Or they walked out in nature and they realized and they experienced and they, you know, natural things. And so, oh yeah, absolutely. The densities were a lot more blended or accessible, I guess you can say.
So just a quick internet search, Anthony the Great was alive from between 251 and 356.
Yeah, there was a lot less energetic interference, and I don't know how to I don't know if I have the language for the densities were. It was just a lot more free to move back then. It wasn't as dense as, you know, we experience, I guess.
Well, we're straight up sitting being kind of, you know, not literally, but kind of held in the third density. We're fifth. I mean, you know, even these words are hard to work with, but fifth density, I guess you can say. But we're being held in the third reality down. It doesn't mean you're stuck in it. You have to realize it, and then you wake up past it. So
Right.
you know that.
Yeah, and I'm also hearing that our concept of time is much different than it was then. So didn't have machine time interfering with the flow of existence, right?
Nope, absolutely. Oh yeah, time, and I've done that. The impossible things with that were, you know, hearing about time, listening to scientists, so and so, whatever, explaining that it doesn't exist. It's a perception, and I'm not gonna, and we all know that, everybody listening here too. So I won't bore you with that. But when I had my own aha moment sitting in that, because I literally had, I mean, almost 2 decades in one of my careers where I got to, you know, it was a visual job, so I got to hear a lot of audio. So then I just went crazy for listening to audio, this, that, and the other, questioning everything. And then usually flip flopping 20 times coming back around. So I had a lot of time to put toward all this, and realize, and then test it. And what I'm talking about now is, yeah, the psychic thing or the time thing. And I would use those examples where I'd hear some podcaster or some video or some documentary say it's all in your head. Well, I'm such an OCD kind of guy. They go, well, of course it is. And then I would do that jump, meaning I'd leave, and it would be, I'll go quickly here, a set time from A to B to get to work that night. And then I would imagine myself landing at this certain stop sign that I knew, and there was nothing, it was a highway, so it was a set speed limit and nothing else adjusted there. And I could literally chop off, let's just say 10 minutes, which is impossible because I was cruise control. I'd go that OCD. I would just set it. And I was graveyard shift guy, so I didn't have traffic. Again, there were no other moving parts in this math problem other than what was going on literally in my head. So I was literally crazy as hell, which might be the case anyway. I don't care what they said. But when the time thing changes and you can record it and see it, well, then you open up your reality and you realize, oh, wait, I'm not crazy. Reality is malleable. We can adjust these things and do that. And then I would do that, and all, you know, not on show for people, and it should be just my own thing. I'm like, oh my God, and have those aha moments or oh shit moments and go from there.
Yeah, I've actually been experimenting with the idea that, you know, every reality exists simultaneously and you can jump a timeline. I think is what most people are talking about these days. But I've had 3 different timekeeping devices running on the dashboard on one of those lonely desert drives, and you really get into that. It's a meditative state, and if you're setting intention, you can feel these energetic shifts. And then if you pay attention, the clock on the dashboard versus the watch on my wrist, which is an old analog, wind up watch, and the clock on the phone are now 5 minutes different than they were an hour ago or whatever. And, the mileage changed or something like that. So yeah, you can definitely play around with it and end up on a different trajectory, I guess.
That reminds me of a story I was reading earlier this week about these 3 newly recruited boys in the British Navy during World War II. And they were doing a training exercise of a land survey, I think it's what it's called. Derek, you might be familiar with this, but you have to plot you're dropped off in a location you don't know, you're not familiar with, and you have to plot certain points on certain coordinates, and then you report back to your commander, and he checks to see if it corresponds to the area that you should have been in. And in this case, am I getting that right, Derek? Does that sound familiar?
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of fancy terms. They teach you how to shoot an azimuth and all that. Basically, just terrain or navigation training, sounds like.
Yeah. So these 3 British soldiers had approached this village, and on the outskirts of the village, they could hear the church bells ringing, and there was smoke coming out of the smokestacks, and but you could tell that there were people there, and it was alive. And they get closer and closer to the village, and then all of a sudden, the church bell stops ringing, and they're in the village, and they look around, and they can't see the church anymore, and all these buildings look hundreds of years older than what they were expecting, right? It's like they had crossed over some weird time bubble into some time in the medieval time period, because of the construction of these buildings were very, very old. But the other weird thing was that the stream that was running through this little town stopped moving, the wind stopped moving, the ducks that were in the stream weren't moving, so everything was silent. And they investigated a butcher shop. They peeked their heads in the windows, and they saw some hides that were up being tanned or whatever, but they had looked, very moldy and old. And the door to the butcher shop was green, which they thought was weird. So they kind of get freaked out at this point, and they exit, the other side of the town. They get out of town, and they're running away at this point. And they get to the top of the next hill, and they turn around, and they can see the church tower again, and the smoke from the smokestacks back, and the bells are ringing, and everything is like it, normally should have been. And they go back to report, what happened to their commander, and the commander's like, "Well, you saw the town, right?" Okay, so he discounted it. He didn't really care that much, but it sounded like they time hopped back in time in the past, but it was frozen like a picture.
I've had a moment or two like that, like a matter of seconds, where it's like, I jokingly called it a glitch in the matrix. I'm like, what? Just enough to catch my bearing, like, what in the heck is going on? And then all of a sudden, it's like it's reset, but not where I'm wandering, dream state, stuff like that. I think we can all do that. But yeah, that's interesting that that can be lots of things I can imagine. I'm sure lots of people, vortexes, which is just a pocket of energy, things like that. It's not like some people say, well, this one leads here to there. It's really a frequency thing. So it's you have to tune yourself to match the frequency of what you want to perceive, if that makes sense. And that's how you communicate with others as well. You just match that. I'm sure there's a 20-letter name for that in physics that I don't know, but that's really what it is. You just imagine it, you can feel it, and then just, again, reaching on whatever sensory levels you can, physical and metaphysical, and then you perceive more, and then you can do that stuff. That's a cool story. I'm sure Ben's done that as well on the remote perceiving stuff.
Yeah, and I mean the whole energy vortex thing on the landscape is was pretty amazing for me. A lot of people go to Sedona for that, and when I got to Sedona, I just wasn't feeling it, and so I kept driving, and then found where I ended up camping out for a couple of weeks, and then found out I was a couple miles above another one that was sort of recently put on the map, and there was definitely a shift in what was perceptible around there for sure. And I think it was just kind of juicing up my abilities to perceive it as well.
Yeah, that's the other interesting thing about the St. Anthony story is that he was in the desert. Like it's and I believe if I remember when I researched this the first time, because it was I just kind of refreshed myself on the story before the show, but he was hanging out in what we know as Greece at this point, and yeah, the whole thing about meeting your demons in the desert and transforming them into your angels kind of came back into my mind, and I know that Miguel talks about that in his Four Agreements book as well. Were you going to say something?
Well, and there's something to the desert. There's something to the desert. You know, going into the wilderness is one thing, and just being in nature and perceiving those energies is one thing. But when you get in the desert, there's a sparseness to it, so that when I was cutting it, it is easier to perceive, and you can focus in and really tune into that frequency. So I do think there is an important part to getting out into the desert. I'm seeing it more and more as I reflect on my time out west. And to be honest, that's kind of the direction my truck was pointed, or yeah, actually, literally, that's the direction my truck is pointed now, as I'm preparing to go off on a journey again.
West. Wagons West. I watched Wagons East not too long ago. The comedy movie.
Yeah, that's a classic. I think that came through on a YouTube feed of mine not too long ago too. I should watch that. John Candy was amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Weird movie. There was a lot of weird movies made in the 70s. Like the Blues Brothers, it's a big cult movie, but it's, one of those weird.
One of the greatest movies of all time, greatest chase scenes,
Yeah,
greatest musicals, greatest
yeah. Well,
tattoos. I want my knuckles tattooed so bad directly from that movie.
I highly recommend knuckle tattoos. They're awesome. But also, I love that movie as well. And it's like, what a hero's journey,
We're on a
right?
mission from
Especially,
God.
yeah. I mean, there's a lot of perfect scenarios for the both of them, right? It's Frodo and Sam,
Oh
so to
yeah, yeah.
speak, right?
It's that great journey story, but it's just two guys with a simple situation in the life.
Yeah,
What's important to them, and they're drawing the line. This is it.
yeah.
Blues.
Well, and kind of one playing off the other, like the angel and the demon on your shoulder kind of thing, right? So you're the guy in the middle when there's that duo team kind of
And real
telling the
life too,
story.
right? With the actors, kind of that same
Yep,
dynamic too. It's
absolutely, yeah.
Does anybody else have anything else for the new business segment? Adam, did you have any? I know that you had shared that you were looking for new employment.
yeah, I'm still looking for new employment. So if you're hiring, hit me up. AdamPLoyal@gmail.com.
Well, I was gonna ask you if I could get your permission, and if you would like, I could do a sigil for you. And try to manifest the most perfect
I
patient.
am not, I will never, ever deny free energy.
All right. Well, it's settled then. I am going to make one of those, and I put it. The last time I did one of these, I did one for my brother actually recently to help him find a new job, and he did. Within, I won't put a number on it because it's not important, but
All
um,
right.
Yeah, and Adam,
I'll check my email tomorrow.
yeah,
I identify as a thaumaturge, right, which loosely translated as a wonder worker. Same kind of. I'll throw a little energy at that too, and I'm sure that we, between the four of us and five of us in the universe, we can whip something up that's pretty awesome.
Right back at you too, man. To new beginnings.
Yeah, cheers, man.
that's exciting. We'll have something to actively report back on and keep an eye on in the future. Um, nothing. Derek, were you going to say something?
No, just other than just a little add-on to that there, what you were all talking about. As far as so when I've changed careers and some and different jobs, different things a lot of times. And what was beneficial for me is, well, actually, I first got in my way of trying to decide what I needed, what I this, that, and the other. I needed so much, and Adam wasn't saying any of this. I needed this, so I would again get in my own way and limit myself. So when I flopped that around and just realized I'd have hold the thoughts or energy of whatever's best for me now, or I'd say whatever's most in alignment with my higher self. Again, the intention behind it's what really matters. So however your wording goes. And then I realized, and then it'd be something else, but it would be a whole lot bigger, better for me or whatever, kind of thing too. So, and I wasn't really saying that to Adam because I know he realizes that too. I'm just kind of adding that in to the show that was something that I got in my own way of often, trying to say, well, I need this much money, or I want this, that, and the other. And I realized, no, I'll just chill out, hero. Let's just not think we can control everything. And then when it came in, and then just followed the breadcrumbs and synchronicities like we keep talking about. And then here's where I ended up now. I'm not in the military anymore. I'm not hundreds of feet underwater, and I'm not in a prison. And by the way, those that just joined us, I was a correctional officer. I was kind of locked up. I spent enough time there, I felt like it. But anyway, I'm out of that.
Dude, are you kidding me?
Yeah. Oh, what, you didn't know about all that?
No. I just mean like proverbially like you're literally in the prison with people who are in prison whose entire world is being confined in a prison mindset. Like just being around that is going to put you in just a like by proxy prison mindset. Like you're there too.
You get it. Not many people pick up on that. And then I was in the maximum security prison for 16 years. So these guys weren't in there for singing too loud in church. They were bad guys. I'd have a dozen literally serial killers on our unit. So then you'd sit down and talk, and they're not all behind bars. This is prison. So it's they're walking around. And yeah, being in that energy, and from my perspective, the entities, the others around them that are not, oh my gosh. And that's where I got my oh geez, I don't remember the old term, but got my my wings or something, where I started learning to swim in the deep end of the pool because bad guy number one would have 4 friends with him. It was crazy environment.
Well, and it's got I at the same time probably had to be pretty amazing that you get exposed directly to that other just extreme end of human being and being able to experience that because it teaches you so much. Like when you breaking a clock and seeing how it's broken will teach you how clocks work. And so I'm endlessly fascinated by people that more regular people are scared by. I'm generally more fascinated by than fearful of.
Oh yeah,
and that's got to be a great opportunity to have had.
Oh, that you see, you can see it the right way. It was, and again, it's not a job for everybody. We get times where it's called a core. They'd come in, the new officers. Long story short, it was 100+ year old prison, and so big steel bars, just like you'd seen in an old movie. In fact, many movies where Butterfly Effect was recorded there, filmed there. The gates were shut, and about half, 40% of the correctional officers, the prison guards, would turn around and leave before they even got through the sally port. It's called. It's that big. So just being in that energy and environment, and then all of that, it takes a certain yeah, mindset, we'll just say. And it was educational because I was there 16 years. That's a long time. And I'm going to say they're not nicer. So a whole lot of those years were double shifts. So you're talking 16 plus hours a day. And so, yeah, it was many, many years. And you, again, you're not separate from these individuals. You're sitting there dealing with them. They have to ask you to go to the bathroom half the time. I mean, so you're really an adult babysitter, but it was interesting.
Was there ever a situation you found yourself in when dealing with these people where you had to ask for help? And I don't mean on a physical level, but like on a more etheric level. Like, was there like did you were you in over your head at any point, and did you have to like reach out and ask for guidance at all?
Yeah, I would and ask for energetic assistance. And it would be individuals that you'll know that and I'll keep that one. Michael and others like that. So some big boys out there. And yeah, they would, and that's why I first realized, because I think, oh, come on, this angel thing, that's not real. And I spun every story in my head which way. But and again, now I'm in such a point in my life where I don't have to kind of walk around things. It is what it is. Nobody's writing my check. We're producing our own energy here and it comes. So I can be totally blunt and honest. Those entities or energies, again, call them whatever you want, exist. Because I would have those unbelievable situations happen where I'd be just in my, so for the sake of the story, officer, me sitting there in my uniform, I don't know, a dozen inmates around me, blah, blah, blah. And then I need assistance energetically. I don't say anything in my head, because I'm having to be the, the tough CEO, hold my space there and all of that. Cause it's not like there's a bunch of us. There's like 100 of them to any one of us. And I'm
Yeah,
not
exactly. You just drawn in a target for more of them.
You get it. Yeah, exactly. So then I would have this chat with, and Michael's a big one. Said, Michael, I need this done over here, please. And I'm not telling you the exact way, but I did that. And then all of a sudden that inmate and this was, I don't know how many times their stories, stand up, walk away, go right to their cell. And I wouldn't have to tell them to yard in, which is a term, or yarding. That's what officers would have to tell them, go to the cell if there's an issue. But anyway, oh, Michael come in and do that for me. I'd say yard this one in, yard that, boom, boom. They just get it. They'd have to. And so in 3D, I don't know, maybe they just randomly had to go to the bathroom. It was all an energy thing. But yes, I would bring in some help, not to go rough and tough and beat these guys up, but to keep me afloat. So now think putting Crazy Derek in the deep end of the pool energy wise, but keeping me just enough. Yeah, I'm going to get yanked under and have to catch my breath, but I'm there to swim. I'm there to learn and experience, because then I get out on the back end here now at Mystical Wares doing all kinds of crazy energy stuff, and in such a place that people come in every day with unbelievable stories or happenings. Everybody around me sees, and it's not a me thing, it's just a Mystical Wares or energy. It's really an energy thing. But yeah, it was a phenomenal training ground, and I won't get into all the stories now, but it was a lot. And yeah, I would have to bring in help, and that's even. It wasn't, and I'll tell you, I wasn't the only one that was aware I was doing the energy thing, because that's where I don't think it was this podcast where I got into the whole silent helicopter thing. Was, again, I do too many podcasts, so I never remember which one I'm on, and that was a 3D thing where I didn't know these, because I heard about it on podcasts. Oh, there's silent helicopters out there. I'm just listening to the show. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe they're baffled because I'm ex-military. So I can see, maybe they're broadcasting the opposite frequency. And it's, who knows? Crazy stuff running through my head. I was a perimeter off, and this is all on film. We had video. The whole black helicopter thing happens above me. 3 of them. One is completely silent and all of that deal. Again, I always kind of cut myself off in these stories because I don't really know how boring they are if they're so off topic. But that stuff would happen there as well. That just you wouldn't think would exist.
No, I mean, I believe.
Oh, the ET! Oh my gosh, the ET, the UFO thing. I hear the stories. I get to the point in my head. Well, there's gotta be ETs, but I'm talking about decades ago. So I wasn't like out there playing checkers with ETs in the fields or anything like that. I was a pretty typical individual, open-minded one, but no, I didn't have I didn't have a bunch of abductions I could remember early on in life. Nothing like that. But I got there in my head after having realizations. I just had what I say is aha moment. Go, well, of course there are. And then I'll tell you what, when we get there in our head with whatever the thing is we're talking about, in this case, ETs, or it can be a miraculous healing, a placebo effect, like we talked about. Well, in the ET thing, all of a sudden, yep, I'd see a ship and straight up, well, I don't know, as far as I know, that ties in what we said earlier, physical, but for me, because it was clear as day, 300 inmates in the, about 300, 200 to 300 inmates in the big yard, it's called. So just think their ball field, running around. And I pull up to work, and this is, again, different shifts, UFO above it, and there's guards in the towers, and these are all my posts as well. So I was a tower guard and perimeter one. And they didn't see a thing, but when I stopped the car to stare and start trying to look in, it disappeared, kind of thing. So that told me, so I had one of those moments that, well, wait a minute, it's just like the Sasquatch thing. You can be standing there, but they're not seeing it. And so the best I could, because I didn't get psychic manual number 5, whatever that is, telling me how this all works. So I just try and put it together in my head. So that told me I had to have been open enough to realize, and then over years of sessions in here, people coming in here, hundreds, if not a couple thousand, the stories I get of cars of people and seeing UFOs, and some choosing to acknowledge it, some not. It's just a thing. The more we realize or come to grips with it, and this is also science, by the way, it straight up enters our reality. And there's some documentaries that a friend of mine, another podcaster, Nancy L. Hopkins, her and I were chatting earlier about it. And she just came across one of these synchronicities on one of these BBC documentaries, whatever, showing that our mind fills in the blanks. And this has all been proven. And again, there's fancy words for it, I'm sure. Fancy. That do that, because our mind does fill in the blanks. And it's just interesting in a good way and bad way.
So have you ever had one of those experiences with a craft and zooming into it and you got there right and it wasn't an ET, like it was another human, and I guess I'm leaning towards like a kind of like a legacy Space Force situation, or I don't know if you've heard of Solar Warden before at all.
I've heard the term. I can't play. Okay, so I'll just answer the question first. I've done that into what I've remoted in. So, okay, remote perceived in, and and I've done it many times before that. So I expected, which I should never expect, another lesson there, to see, jump into a craft and maybe have an ET spot me, but maybe one of them, not whatever, and just deal with it from there. And which is usually not a big deal. Oh no, I got all of a sudden a face. So a persona came at me. Whoever they are, knew, and it was when I remote perceived off this planet, and I can't tell you where it was because I was going into a ship. So I thought it knew whatever it was. Remember, I'm just being as vague as I have to be. I'm not like keeping secrets. It knew I was remote perceiving and jumped right into my space and said, and greeted me. We had a little chat from there. And it visually, neck up, it was just a head is all I really remember. It was, and it knew I was doing that, and that startled the heck out of me. I'll tell you, I'm a tough guy to startle too. Not just because of the prison thing, for a lot of reasons. I'm not a guy that gets scared. And not that I was scared, but catch me off guard. And that did. It was just really unusual. So now maybe you can fill in the blanks to me. But what they did was they were basically telling me, you're trying to go a little too far. And they knew that I wasn't just going to see stuff. I was going to perceive it, which means understand it. What you can say, download it. I can do a lot of things. Let's just say they'll call it psychometry, or I think it's whatever it is, when you sleep on a book, and you absorb the information, and that's the thing.
Yeah.
What is it?
Osmosis.
Is it? I guess it would be awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes sense, but I don't know what I do. But when I do that remotely, I get the more information because I know it's there and available. And it's like, again, eating food. You don't just smell it, you taste it, you touch it, you feel everything's all at once. So yeah, I've done that and come into somebody trying to stop me. And I don't know if that's a Solar Warden thing. I do know I've heard about, secret space program and all that.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Well, there is stuff on Solar Warden. I'll tell you that now because I get stuff right this second as I'm glancing at it. So But I don't know if you want to ask anything or say anything.
Well, you in a private conversation between you and I some time ago, you had shared with me something about involving the moon and shungite, and I don't know if that has happened already. I don't know if you pick up what I'm laying down, but is that something you can talk about now, or are we still waiting for that to happen?
I will let you know here in like 2 seconds. Oh, here we go right now. I'm looking to see what the lunar mission is doing. All right. It's on, and there's a whole website. No, I can't say anything yet. Um, it'll be there. I'll just say that. There will be shungite on the moon. So, and I really got to just stop talking right there. But here this year, so once certain things have left our atmosphere, there's no stopping it. So that's a good thing. So that's why we just got to be kind of vague. So
Moving on.
yep, moving on for now, but we'll have stuff in the future to chat about. Oh, it did make it our shungite made it into Fukushima, I'll tell you that. Well, the government did that. I got a whole study on that, but and not because they heard me on a podcast saying it. They're doing it because they realized the whole, and it's not a shungite show we're doing, everybody, but we just chatted about it for a minute. But you know, I had people who went over to Fukushima, they didn't personally drop it in the nuclear plant. They got it in the whole province over there and all the land and the areas and containers. But I'll just say the government, they did, because they published it in a news article, went over there and used shungite at Fukushima.
I recently started re-wearing my shungite pendant. I hadn't been wearing it for a number of months. I think I'd stopped sometime during 13 questions, but it's back on my chain now. It's a different one, not the original one I bought when I first ran into Derek, but it's still from Derek's store. Which, by the way, listener, you should totally go and check out the web store or the online store. I know if you can't get there physically because he's in Mount Vernon, Washington, but the website is great. There's got tons of cool stuff on there to look at. So go get yourself some shungite. But yeah, this isn't a promo for that necessarily. Anybody else, new business, anything for the good of the group before we move on to the third segment dealing with being impeccable with your word? No takers. Cool. We're doing pretty good on time, so I'm gonna try to slow down with this one and not rush through it because we're talking about words, right? So I summarized the chapter into 21 bullet points, and I have two excerpts to read from the book, which are less than a page. So hopefully this won't be too boring for you. So this is actually the first agreement that Don talks about, and it is being impeccable with your word. He says that this is the most important and the most difficult agreement to honor out of all four of them. Our word is the power that we have to create. And then he gives an example of the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and we all know that stuff, right? And then what came to my mind was the word abracadabra, because Adam and I did a whole slew of interviews on 13 questions that were referrals from Mark England, right? And his whole thing was the stories that we tell ourselves, which ties in perfectly with what Don Miguel's talking about. And one of the things that Mark talks about is the word abracadabra. And just a quick Google search, it means Aramaic, right? It means I will create as I speak, or with my word I create. There's a few different translations to go from, but something along those lines. So this is a very old, I guess what I'm trying to say is a very old idea that our word is very powerful. The third bullet point, intent manifests through the word. And if you'll recall, intent is one of the three masteries that Miguel talks about, the other two being awareness and transformation. The word is a force. It is a tool of magic, just like a sword with two edges. All of the magic you possess is based on your word. Your word is pure magic, and misuse of your words is black magic. The human mind is like fertile ground where seeds are continually being planted. One fear or doubt planted can create an endless drama of events. One word is like a spell, and humans use the word like black magicians, thoughtlessly putting spells on each other. Every human is a magician. We can either put a spell on someone or release someone from a spell. We cast spells all the time with our opinions. During what he calls our domestication, our upbringing, our childhood, right? During our domestication, our parents and siblings give their opinions about us without even thinking. We believed these opinions and we lived in fear over these opinions. They've hooked our attention in this way. And the first excerpt from the book comes from page 31. Now let us see what the word impeccability means. Impeccability means without sin. Impeccable comes from the Latin peccatus, which means sin. The im in impeccable means without. So impeccable means without sin. Religions talk about sin and sinners, but let's understand what it really means to sin. A sin is anything that you do which goes against yourself. Everything you feel or believe or say that goes against yourself is a sin. You go against yourself when you judge or blame yourself for anything. Being without sin is exactly the opposite. Being impeccable is not going against yourself. When you are impeccable, you take responsibility for your actions, but you do not judge or blame yourself. From this point of view, the whole concept of sin changes from something moral or religious to something common sense. Sin begins with rejection of yourself. Self-rejection is the biggest sin that you can commit. In religious terms, self-rejection is a mortal sin, which leads to death. Impeccability, on the other hand, leads to life. Back to my bullet points. So this agreement will cause the truth to manifest in you. This agreement of being impeccable with your word, right, will cause the truth to manifest in you, and it will clean out all the emotional poison that exists within you. Whenever we hear an opinion and believe it, we make an agreement, and it becomes part of our belief system. People who love us do black magic on us, but they don't know what they do. This is why we must forgive them. They don't know what they do. These types of spells are difficult to break. The only thing that could break a spell is to make a new agreement based on truth. The truth is the most important part of being impeccable with your word. Gossip is like black magic at its gossip is, it's not is like, gossip is black magic at its very worst because it is pure poison. We learned how to gossip by agreement. We learned that this is a normal thing to do. And people like to know why we learn this. And the reason that he gives is because misery loves company. And then he compares gossip to a computer virus. It uses the same language or the same source code as a computer, but with harmful intent. And it can be transmitted or inserted into your program without your awareness. So again, we have the intent aspect and the awareness aspect popping up again, which are the masteries, the two other masteries besides transformation, right? Which is what we're talking about now. So he continues, imagine every single time others gossip to you, they insert a computer virus into your mind, causing you to think a little less clearly every time. Imagine this pattern spreading exponentially over all the human race. They can only read information through conduits or through circuits clogged with a poisonous contagious virus. This is what is called the mitote, the chaos of 1,000 different voices all trying to talk at the same time in your mind. Even worse are the black magicians who intentionally spread the virus, like computer hackers. We receive gossip and spells from others, from outside of ourselves, but we also receive those things from the way that we talk to ourselves, right? Which is what Mark England kind of gets into and helps people with rewrite their stories, right? Once we understand what the word is and does, and we make this agreement to be impeccable, we can begin to see that all the changes that are possible. But first, we will see that it will be with how you deal with yourself first, and then later in how you deal with others. Being impeccable with your word will give you immunity from black magicians. And my last bullet point, you can measure the impeccability of your word by your level of self-love. And this is a directly proportionate relationship. And then to end, I have one last short excerpt from the end of the chapter. You can transcend the dream of hell just by making the agreement to be impeccable with your word. Right now, I am planting that seed in your mind. Whether or not the seed grows depends upon how fertile your mind is for the seeds of love. It is up to you to make this agreement with yourself. I am impeccable with my word. Nurture this seed, and as it grows in your mind, it will germinate more seeds of love to replace the seeds of fear. This first agreement will change the kind of seeds your mind is fertile for. Be impeccable with your word. This is the first agreement that you should make if you want to be free, if you want to be happy, if you want to transcend the level of existence that is hell. It is very powerful. Use the word in the correct way. Use the word to share your love. Use white magic, beginning with yourself. Tell yourself how wonderful you are, how great you are. Tell yourself how much you love yourself. Use the word to break all those teeny tiny agreements that make you suffer. And with that, that's the end of it. That's all I got for this one. Initial thoughts?
It was interesting how they tied together the gossip and spells and how we so I hadn't thought about it like that, and then how we do cast our own spells on ourselves, and just by in our own heads limit ourselves. And that is the thing, like I was even talking about that earlier. Of course, once you have a realization or change your mind, well, then your literal reality can change. And mine did, just literally by change. I like to make the poor joke that it wasn't a special yoga pose I learned that made the psychic stuff and the sight and all that get enhanced. It was literally just getting out of my own, and I'm not dissing yoga. It's just really getting out of my own head, or kind of the opposite in there, and just getting out of my own way. I should have turned that. And then more happened. And it wasn't anything I did, it was just a realization. So that's, I'm just kind of tying together with that, the spells that we do that on ourselves, regardless of how we describe it. But we do affect ourselves and limit ourselves. And then in the opposite as well.
Yeah, and I was gonna say every word counts, right? And for that matter, for spells on yourself, every thought, if you're really focused in on something, that it'll probably manifest, So, but that being said, every word does matter. So if you're gossiping, right, you're talking about others' experiences or other people instead of ideas, or how to, better communicate your ideas. And it's I noticed earlier that I was ending my thought, or my trying to get an idea out with, I guess, or I suppose. And I noticed that just I've been trying to be more and more observant of how I speak. And it's funny because when I was saying that, I was searching for the right word. And so I don't know if Derek would agree with this, but the more time I've spent, you know, in the spirit world or those etheric realms dealing with other energies, other consciousness, language is very limiting. So trying to describe some of these things, finding the right word, I don't know if, you know, just how I'm kind of stumbling on it now, right? It's really hard to get through the whole message that comes in on energetic waves, right? Because it's more than words. When you really get into a point of understanding what is trying to be conveyed, and it's a practice much like anything else. And so, like Derek was saying, getting out of his own way, creating the time and space to, you know, internalize it and embody it. Am I making any sense?
I know it's like we all have to invent a new vocabulary even to talk about this stuff. It's, you know, I guess an analogy would be, you know, trying to go into a different country for the first time and all their spices are different. How are you going to describe it? You can't. It's just, I mean, maybe somebody could, but I couldn't. It's just a new experience, a new thing. And how do you know, you have to wrap your head around it, first of all, and then try and articulate it. And at least I'm not that highly educated where I have, you know, a whole lot to pull from, but, you know, we all got to communicate in what we can call layman's terms anyway. So, and then on the metaphysical levels, there's just so many aspects. You can't. Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. You can stumble and just try and get overall meanings or the gist across.
And but within that, if you're also being observant of how you're, you know, communicating and trying to improve upon that consciously, it, for me anyway, the fewer the words the better, I suppose. And being impeccable with that is, I don't know, English has always sort of baffled me anyway as a language. And even though it's my first one, right, it's one of the weirdest languages when you start breaking it down, and especially if you've studied other languages and have a little bit of a handle on some how theirs are put together, right? English starts getting weirder and weirder.
Oh, so, yeah. Ich spreche ein bisschen Gasshaus Deutsch. Yeah, I lived in Germany for years, so that's in other languages. And so it's, oh yeah, and then the whole telepathy thing, you know, whole kind of not, but pivot here, that's legit. So of course, I know you've experienced that too. So it doesn't matter who you're communicating with, it comes through and you get it in English or Mandarin or whatever you come with their individuals understanding. But and that's a cool part about it, because you're not having to translate. But it's just so much more in there. Yeah, it's like trying to describe a person. Well, how do they feel? What do they look like? Is their personality? You know, there's just many aspects, so it's tough.
I mean, you could kind of say that St. Anthony had some telepathic communication with that satyr he came across, because he was even amazed himself that he could understand the thing to begin with, right? So chances are, you know, that the thing's probably not speaking Greek or whatever, right? I mean, he's probably got his own language.
And it's interesting too, because the whole, you know, I don't want to get too caught up on the idea of misusing your words as sin either, because at some point I read that the word sin in Greek was an archery term, and it was just that you missed the bullseye. So it's really not like putting a weight on yourself or casting yourself into hell for a sin is sort of silly, because you're going to have an opportunity to shoot another arrow, right? And it's a practice being with language, attempting not to miss the mark, right? So
yeah, like like the phrase "everybody sins" comes to mind, right? But during an interview I had with Dr. Tom Campbell on 13 Questions, one of the perspectives that he shared that I truly enjoy was that there are no mistakes, like there are no sins, right? And it's only a bad thing if you don't learn from it and you have to do it again, right? So it's not necessarily that sinning or missing your mark is a bad thing. It's a learning opportunity, right? And everybody needs to learn somehow, right? So it's
It's a
not,
lesson.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. So it's to kind of take off the weight of damnation in hell and so forth, right? It's not that serious.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I think there's a little play of words going on there too with the whole less sin and yeah, it's all perspective anyway.
All right. Well, there was a little bit of a tie-in to what I wanted to. We talked about covering the Celestine prophecy as our kind of next third third segment topic. I haven't really decided. I'm open to suggestions how to exactly tackle that. But in reading about being impeccable with your word, the part where he says talks about our domestication and our upbringing and how we learn to gossip, right? And we believe these opinions that we hear about ourselves from people that love us and that raise us, and how it hooks our attentions, right? All this talk reminded me of the four control dramas that James Redfield, well, is talked about in the Celestine Prophecy. I won't say that he wrote about the four control dramas because I think that they're part of one of the insights, if I remember correctly. I know Ben's read the book or watched the movie recently, so you feel free to jump in if it doesn't sound correctly. But the four control
Um,
dramas, yeah.
yeah, I haven't. It's been a couple years since I read it. Um, and yeah, I don't know if I've watched the movie. I don't unsubscribe to
Mhm.
a lot of things the past little while. So, huh, I'm gonna have to get caught up on that. Maybe we can talk about it next week while we're skipping a day, but get
Yeah,
something set up.
yeah, I'd appreciate that. If you want to tag team it, that'd be great.
Yeah.
But the but during our domestic that I don't know that made me connect to the 2 points, right? Like during our domestication, we have these control dramas that we develop on how to get energy from our surroundings, right? From our parents, and we learn these things from a very young age. From how do we first get food, attention, love, warmth, family dynamics, growing up, all this good stuff. And
Well,
yeah,
and I was just reading about how um especially young kids, right? Their auric field isn't fully developed and they're really dependent on their parents' um energy field for protection and just overall, you know, being for the first few years. Um and it was the art it was written by a parent. So it was, they were like, it explains why you're always so tired and you know gaining your body gains weight and carries it different because you're carrying a lot of extra energy and stuff like that. So um it sort of makes sense too that you would learn just from being around that kind of energy. It would um you're gonna pick up on whatever that imprint is, right?
absolutely. Yeah, so I don't remember them off the top of my head, but good thing it's not the topic for this particular podcast. But in researching or discovering those four control dramas is very helpful tool to decipher really the past interactions that you've had with people the with, throughout your life, right? Not you in particular, Ben, but the proverbial you, right? And I guess another thing that popped out to me when I was making these notes is that he emphasizes the forgiveness, right? Forgiveness is important when going back and rewriting our past, rewriting the stories that happened to us, because these people, they're casting spells without intent or without awareness, right? I mean, they're having an effect, but they're not thinking all the way through, and it's not their fault, right? I know ignorance of the laws and isn't an excuse, but it doesn't mean that we still can't forgive, right?
Well, I mean, just thinking changes the world around you. Look at the
Mhm.
random number generating experiments. Marketing works. So yeah, in a sense, it, it's not always your fault. Sometimes you watch a commercial and it makes you think a bad thing, and next thing you know, you think you got lymphoma.
It is just, all the frequency of it, right? It's those energy waves going out. Um, Not just because there's not the awareness of it, yeah, or it's the intention that counts, right?
Back to the intention mastery.
Mhm.
So to capstone our exploration of the Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, I wanted to give myself something to be reminded of the Four Agreements. So I went on, this arrived today in the mail, of course, perfectly. I went on Etsy and I found this little art print of the Four Agreements. Be impeccable with your word. Don't take anything personally. Don't make assumptions. Always do your best. I know this is a visual or audio only podcast, but I'm showing everybody else that's here. And it's uncolored, so I thought my wife was suggesting maybe color it and make it into a little meditation. But I'm gonna hang this right above my computer desk right here, so I will be having that in front of me continually as we move forward with this working. So, and I would invite all the listeners to maybe adopt the Four Agreements if it sounds something that you want to try to do, right? To master the art of transformation of alchemy. I think these are four very practical steps to take, which is why we kind of decided to cover it in the third segment to be inspirational and to shed some more light on aspects of consciousness and how we can deal with it. So I hope you all enjoyed our little exploration from the workings of Don Miguel. I do believe that he came out with another book recently, or since that, after that one got published, and there might be a fifth agreement. So we might revisit Mr. Ruiz in the future. Do we have any parting thoughts from the Chrononaut primes at all before we wrap up this evening?
No, I think I'm good. I appreciate how we do
Peace
these
and love.
out. Yeah, absolutely. I had a great time.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining me for another installment of the working that is Chrononaut Chronicles. And like I said, we will be skipping next week because it is Memorial Day. Not only Memorial Day, but I'll be traveling for a wedding. So wish me luck there. I wish you all a happy and healthy holiday weekend. And until next time, Chrononauts, Carpe Diem.